They're attacking Earth? The Galactic Council could only stare in horror. Part 2. The Valkyrie fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel just beyond the orbit of Neptune. 12,000 warships hung in the cold darkness of space, their hulls gleaming under the faint light of a distant sun. They were arranged in a perfect attack formation, rows upon rows of cruisers, destroyers, carriers, and at the center, the massive flagship where Admiral Draxon commanded the entire operation. Draxon stood on the bridge of his flagship, looking out through the wide viewing window at the stars ahead. He was older than Zorath, with darker scales and scars running down the left side of his face. He had fought in 11 campaigns across the galaxy. He had conquered 3 species. He had never lost. He looked at the scanner readings and felt satisfied. His forward scouts had mapped the Sol system days ago. The humans had a few hundred small ships scattered around their planet and their moon, along with some orbital platforms that looked like they were built for science, not war. There was nothing here that could challenge his fleet. "Open a broadcast channel," Draxon ordered. "All frequencies. I want every human on that planet to hear this." His communications officer obeyed, and Draxon spoke into the microphone with a voice that had made entire worlds surrender. "People of Earth, I am Admiral Draxon of the Valkyrie Dominion. Your system is now under our authority. You will surrender all military equipment. You will hand over control of your governments. You will prepare for occupation. You have 12 hours to comply. If you do not, we will take your world by force. There will be no second warning." He closed the channel and sat back in his command chair. He expected panic. He expected confusion. He expected desperate, begging messages asking for mercy. What he got 6 minutes later was something very different. On Earth, the message had been received, translated, and delivered to every major government within minutes. President Laura Finch sat at the head of a long table in a bunker deep beneath the White House. She was 53 years old, with steady brown eyes and a calm voice that never seemed to shake, even now. Around her sat the Joint Chiefs of Staff, intelligence directors, and a small group of civilians who had been brought in under heavy security. One of those civilians was Danny Hobbs. He was 73 years old, retired, and walked with a cane because of a bad knee he had never bothered to get fixed. He had thin white hair and wore a wrinkled jacket that looked like he had slept in it, which he had. Danny had been woken up at 3 a.m, driven to the White House in an unmarked car, and escorted underground by men with guns, who called him Sir with a level of respect that made him uncomfortable. Danny was the man who had designed Project Longwatch. 30 years ago, when the first confirmed detection of extraterrestrial signals had been made in secret, the governments of Earth had come together and asked one question: what do we do if they come here and they are not friendly? Danny, then a young engineer working for the Defense Department, had been given the job of answering that question. He had spent the next 20 years of his life building the answer. Now he sat at the table, looking at the fleet projections on the screen, and he shook his head slowly. 12,000 ships, he said quietly. That is a lot. Can we handle it? President Finch asked. Danny looked at her. Madam President, we built Longwatch to handle exactly this. The question is not whether we can fight them. The question is whether we want to warn them first or let them find out the hard way. Finch thought about it for less than 10 seconds. We warn them. I am not going to start humanity's first contact with an alien species by shooting without talking. She wrote the reply herself. It was short and direct. Admiral Draxon, this is President Laura Finch of Earth. We welcome you to our solar system. We have no desire for war. However, we will defend our home without hesitation. We ask you to withdraw your fleet. This is not a request made from weakness. The message was transmitted. Draxon received it on his bridge, read it once, and laughed. His officers laughed with him. She asks us to withdraw, Draxon said, shaking his head. Brave words from a species that has never fought anyone but itself. Move the forward squadrons past the asteroid belt. Destroy anything you find. 300 Valkyrie warships broke formation and accelerated toward the inner system. They were fast, sleek, and armed with energy weapons that could cut through metal like a hot blade through ice. As they crossed into the asteroid belt, the ships began picking up strange readings. Small objects, no bigger than a man, drifting among the rocks. They were cold, dark, and nearly invisible to Valkyrie scanners. The objects had no energy signatures, no heat, and no movement. They looked like dead rocks. They were not rocks. In the command center under the Rocky Mountains, Katie Marsh watched the Valkyrie ships move deeper into the asteroid belt. She had been tracking them for hours, and now they were exactly where she needed them to be. She looked at Colonel Brady. They are in the field, sir. Light them up. Katie pressed a single button on her console. Across the asteroid belt, 2,000 autonomous mines woke up at the same time. Each one was small, simple, and ugly. They had no computers worth speaking of, just a basic proximity sensor and a shaped nuclear charge designed to punch through energy shields by making direct contact with a ship's hull before detonating. They had been floating out there for 15 years, waiting for this exact moment. The first mine hit a Valkyrie destroyer on its port side. The shaped charge blew through the ship's shield like it was not there, and tore a hole in the hull big enough to fly a truck through. The ship broke apart in seconds. Then another mine hit, then 3 more, then 20, then 100. The Valkyrie forward squadron flew into a wall of explosions. Ships broke apart, spun out of control, and crashed into each other. The darkness of the asteroid belt lit up with fire and flying metal. Valkyrie captains screamed into their communications channels, calling for help, calling for orders, calling for anyone to tell them what was happening. In 3 minutes, 47 Valkyrie ships were destroyed. Dozens more were damaged and drifting. On the bridge of his flagship, Draxon stared at the casualty reports as they came in. His jaw was tight, and the scales on his neck had turned a darker shade of green, which happened when a Valkyrie was angry or afraid. Right now, he was both. What hit them? He demanded. Mines, Admiral, his tactical officer said. Nuclear devices. Primitive, but effective. They were hidden in the asteroid field. Draxon slammed his fist on the arm of his chair. Mines. They seeded their own asteroid belt with nuclear mines. He took a breath and steadied himself. It does not matter. They have played their best trick. Push the fleet forward. Full speed. We end this today. The remaining Valkyrie fleet tightened its formation and accelerated past the asteroid belt, heading for Earth at maximum speed. In the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council, 400 species watched the battle footage on their screens. The images of Valkyrie warships breaking apart in the asteroid belt played in perfect clarity. The chamber was very quiet. Chancellor Mivan sat in her stone seat and watched without expression. She had expected something like this, but seeing it was different from expecting it. The humans had turned their own asteroid belt into a weapon. They had been preparing for years, maybe decades. In the alcove on the far side of the chamber, the Aeoni witness stood perfectly still. It had been observing the footage without comment, but now it transmitted a single concept back to its home collective. The concept did not translate perfectly into any spoken language, but the closest meaning was this: it has begun. A delegate from a small trading federation stood up and called out to the chamber. How is this possible? They are a pre-contact species. How do they have weapons in their asteroid belt? Nobody answered, because nobody knew. Back on Earth, Colonel Brady looked at the tactical display showing the Valkyrie fleet pushing past the asteroid belt. He turned to Katie. How many did we get? 47 confirmed destroyed, At least 30 more damaged. Brady nodded slowly. Good. But that was just the welcome mat. He picked up his phone. Get me the president. Tell her Phase 1 is complete. They are coming in, and they are angry. In her bunker, President Finch received the update. She looked at Danny Hobbs, who was eating a sandwich like nothing unusual was happening. They are still coming, she said. Danny nodded, chewing. Of course they are. They are proud. They will not turn around because of a few mines. He swallowed and looked at her. But they will turn around. Give it time. Finch stared at the old man for a moment, then turned back to her generals. Move to Phase 2. Wake up everything we have. Across the planet, the signal went out, and the sleeping giant opened its eyes. They're attacking Earth. The Galactic Council could only stare in horror. Part 3. The Valkyrie fleet crossed the orbit of Mars in tight formation. Admiral Draxon had reorganized his ships into a defensive sphere, with the heaviest cruisers on the outside and the carriers protected in the center. He was not going to lose any more ships to hidden tricks. His scanners were running at full power, sweeping everything in front of them. He found nothing. The space around Mars was quiet and empty, just a dead red planet covered in dust and rocks, with a thin atmosphere that could not support life. Draxon looked at it through the viewing window and felt his confidence return. Whatever tricks the humans had, they were clearly limited to their asteroid belt. Now in open space, his fleet would have the advantage. Then, the surface of Mars began to move. It started with a low rumble that showed up on the fleet's seismic sensors. The dust on the Martian surface shifted and cracked. Then, 3 enormous structures broke through the ground, rising slowly like giants waking up from a long sleep. Each one was over 2 kilometers long, flat and angular, covered in thick armor plating and rows of weapons batteries that lined their surfaces like teeth. They had no beauty to them. They were not designed to look good. They were designed to kill. They were orbital defense platforms, built in secret over 20 years by human crews who had lived and worked in underground bases beneath the Martian surface. The materials had been shipped from Earth in cargo pods disguised as scientific equipment. The workers had rotated in and out on missions that the public thought were simple research trips. Everything about the platforms had been hidden in plain sight. Draxon stared at the 3 massive structures rising from the red dust. For the first time since the campaign began, he felt something cold in his chest. "What are those?" he said. His tactical officer ran the scans. "Unknown structures, Admiral. They appear to be weapons platforms. They are powering up. Shields to maximum. All ships prepare for—" He did not finish the sentence. The 3 platforms fired at the same time. Their main weapons were magnetic accelerators, long rails built into the spine of each platform that launched solid tungsten slugs, each one the size of a small car, at a speed that was hard to believe. The slugs crossed the distance between Mars and the Valkyrie fleet in seconds. They hit with so much force that the energy shields on the Valkyrie ships held for less than a heartbeat, before the slugs punched through them like paper. The first volley hit the front line of the Valkyrie formation. Ships did not just take damage, they came apart. A heavy cruiser was hit dead center and broke into 2 pieces that spun away from each other, trailing fire and debris. A destroyer took a slug through its engine section and exploded so violently that the ships on either side of it were thrown off course. In the space of 10 seconds, the front line of Draxon's fleet ceased to exist. "Return fire," Draxon roared. "All ships, concentrate fire on those platforms. Destroy them now." The Valkyrie fleet swarmed toward the 3 platforms, pouring energy weapon fire at them from every angle. The platforms were tough, built with layers of heavy armor designed to absorb punishment, but they were not invincible. Platform 2 took hit after hit until its armor cracked and its internal systems failed. It broke apart in a slow, grinding explosion, pieces of it falling back toward the Martian surface like burning rain. But platforms 1 and 3 kept firing. Volley after volley of tungsten slugs tore through the Valkyrie formation. By the time Draxon's ships finally moved out of range, he had lost over 300 warships. His fleet, which had entered the Sol system 12,000 strong, was now closer to 8,000, and they had not even reached Earth yet. Draxon stood on his bridge, surrounded by damage reports and casualty figures. His officers were quiet. The easy confidence that had filled the fleet at the start of the mission was gone. In its place was something that Valkyrie soldiers were not used to feeling: doubt. "Continue to Earth," Draxon said through clenched teeth. "We still outnumber them. We will finish this." The fleet moved on, leaving the wreckage behind. On Earth, Colonel Brady watched the battle at Mars play out on his screens, and allowed himself a small nod. They had cost the Valkyrie dearly, and bought time for the next phase. He picked up his phone. "This is Brady. Activate Phase 2. Everything, right now." Across the planet, the order was received, and Earth began to show what it had been hiding. In the Mojave Desert, a section of ground split open, and a launch bay the size of a football field was revealed beneath it. Inside, rows of combat drones sat on launch rails, sleek and black and loaded with weapons. They began launching one after another, climbing into the sky on pillars of fire and disappearing into the upper atmosphere. In the deep waters of the Pacific Ocean, 3 enormous submersible carriers that had been sitting on the ocean floor for years rose to the surface. Their decks opened, and hundreds more drones launched from their holds, climbing straight up through the clouds. In orbit, platforms that had been disguised as weather satellites and space junk for decades unfolded and revealed themselves. Weapons arrays extended from their sides. Targeting systems came online. Communication networks linked them together into a single coordinated defense grid. From underground bases in the Ural Mountains, the Swiss Alps, the Australian outback, and a dozen other locations around the world, more ships and drones launched. Some were big, armored warships with crews of 50. Some were small, fast interceptors with a single pilot. Some had no pilot at all, just a simple combat program that told them to find the enemy and fight. The Valkyrie intelligence reports had estimated that humanity had fewer than 500 space-capable military vessels. The real number was closer to 14,000, and more were launching every hour. At the Galactic Council, the delegates watched the sensor data in disbelief. The numbers kept climbing on their screens. Ship after ship after ship, rising from the surface of a single planet that was not supposed to have any real military power. A delegate from the Tyranni Federation, a species of tall, thin beings known for their calm logic, stood up and spoke in a voice that cracked slightly. "This is not possible. Where did they build all of this? How did they hide it? Our surveys showed nothing." Chancellor Mivan looked down at the delegate from her stone seat. "Your surveys showed what they wanted you to see." In the alcove, the Aeoni witness spoke for the second time that day. Its voice filled the chamber like light fills a dark room, reaching every corner without effort. "You were not watching closely enough," the witness said. "None of you were." "That is precisely what they intended." The chamber fell silent again. Mivan turned to her intelligence advisor, a nervous young officer of her species who was clutching a data tablet with all 4 of his hands. "Explain this to me," she said. "How did a species with no faster-than-light travel build a military force of this size without anyone in the galaxy noticing?" The advisor swallowed hard and spoke in a shaking voice. "Chancellor, based on the data we are now receiving, It appears that humanity has been preparing for an extraterrestrial invasion for at least 50 years. Every major nation on their planet contributed resources, personnel, and technology under a secret agreement. They called it Project Longwatch. 50 years, Mivan repeated. Yes, Chancellor. They appear to have begun shortly after they first detected alien signals in their system. They never announced the detection publicly. They simply began building. Mivan was quiet for a long moment. The arguments, the wars, the political divisions they showed the galaxy, were those real? Yes, Chancellor, they were real. Humans genuinely fight among themselves, but underneath all of that, they had this. A single, unified preparation for the day when something came from outside. Their divisions were real, but they were also a mask. Beneath it was a species that understood one thing very clearly. And what is that? The advisor looked at her with something close to fear in his eyes. That the universe is dangerous, and that no one was coming to save them. Back on Earth, Danny Hobbs sat in the command center, watching the battle unfold on a wall of screens. Ships launched, drones climbed, orbital platforms powered up. The planet he had spent his whole life on was transforming before his eyes, from a quiet blue world into a fortress. A young officer standing nearby looked at the old man and asked, "Sir, did you really believe this day would come? When you built all this, did you actually think aliens would attack?" Danny looked at the young man for a long moment. His eyes were tired but steady. "Son," he said, "I built this whole thing because I knew it would." He turned back to the screens and watched his life's work come alive. "They're attacking Earth?" The Galactic Council could only stare in horror. Part 4. The Velkari fleet reached Earth orbit, and Admiral Draxon finally saw the planet he had come to conquer. It was blue and green and white, covered in oceans and clouds, spinning slowly in the light of its yellow sun. It looked peaceful. It looked soft. It was neither of those things. As soon as the fleet entered high orbit, the full scale of Earth's defenses became clear. Thousands of ships and drones were arranged in layered formations around the planet. Orbital weapons platforms hung in fixed positions, their targeting systems already locked onto the Velkari fleet. Ground-based tracking stations on every continent were feeding data to every weapon in the network. The entire planet was wrapped in a web of overlapping fields of fire, and there was no angle of approach that was not covered. Draxon looked at the tactical display, and his jaw tightened. He still had nearly 8,000 ships. The humans had more individual units, but many of them were small drones, not true warships. He still believed he could win this fight with superior firepower and experience. His species had been fighting wars across the stars for centuries. These humans had never fought anyone but each other. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The first wave of human drones hit the outer edge of the Velkari formation like a swarm of angry insects. There were thousands of them, small and fast, each one carrying a pair of kinetic missiles and a basic combat program. They were not smart. They did not need to be. They just needed to get close enough to fire and then get out of the way. For every drone the Velkari shot down, 2 more appeared. They came from the surface, from orbital carriers, from hidden launch bays on the moon. The supply seemed endless. The drones were not doing heavy damage on their own, but they were doing something worse. They were forcing the Velkari ships to spread their fire, to waste energy on small targets, to break formation to chase threats that came from every direction. And while the Velkari were busy swatting at drones, the real attack came. Commander Lisa Grant stood on the bridge of the carrier vessel Steadfast. She was 41 years old, with short red hair and a voice that carried the kind of quiet authority that made people listen without her needing to shout. She had spent 20 years in the Naval Space Program, most of it in classified operations that she could never tell her family about. She had trained for this moment her entire career. All fleet groups, "This is Grant," she said into her communication channel. "Execute Attack Pattern 7. 3-axis approach. Close to short range, and hit them hard. Do not stop moving." The human warships were nothing like the Valkyrie's sleek, elegant vessels. They were thick, heavy, and ugly, built with layer after layer of armor plating, and packed with kinetic weapons. They looked like flying bunkers. They were slow compared to Valkyrie ships, but they could take an enormous amount of punishment, and their weapons hit like sledgehammers at close range. 3 groups of human warships came at the Valkyrie from 3 different directions at the same time. They pushed through the drone swarms and closed the distance fast. The Valkyrie fired their energy weapons and scored hits, burning through armor and crippling ships. But the human vessels kept coming. Even damaged, even on fire, they kept pushing forward until they were close enough to fire their main guns. The kinetic cannons on the human warships fired solid metal rounds at tremendous speed. At close range, they tore through Valkyrie shields and armor with devastating effect. The battle turned into a close-range brawl, ships on both sides trading blows at distances where neither could miss. Lisa watched her fleet numbers drop on the tactical display. She lost a quarter of her ships in the first 30 minutes of fighting. Each one that disappeared from the screen was a crew of people she had trained with, eaten with, laughed with. She felt every loss like a punch to the chest, but she did not stop. She could not stop. "Keep pressing," she ordered. "Do not give them room to breathe." The Valkyrie were losing more. Their shields, designed to stop energy weapons at long range, were less effective against solid projectiles at short distance. Their sleek hulls cracked and split under the impact of kinetic rounds. For every human ship that went down, 2 or 3 Valkyrie ships fell with it. On the surface, Colonel Brady coordinated the ground-based defenses. Railgun batteries hidden in mountain ranges and underground bunkers fired tungsten slugs into orbit with pinpoint accuracy. Each shot was guided by the tracking network, and each shot found its target. Valkyrie ships in low orbit were hit from below by weapons they never saw coming. Draxon, watching his fleet being torn apart from every direction, made a desperate decision. If he could not win the battle in space, he would strike at the planet directly. Break the humans' will, make them surrender to stop the destruction. He ordered 30 of his heavy cruisers to align their main weapons and fire at a major population center on the eastern coast of North America. The ships took position and charged their energy cannons. The beams fired, bright and terrible, cutting through the darkness of space toward the planet below. The beams never reached the ground. High above the atmosphere, a network of orbital mirror stations, another piece of Project Longwatch that nobody in the galaxy had known about, caught the energy beams and scattered them. The focused destructive power was spread across the upper atmosphere, turning it into a brilliant light show that stretched across the sky from horizon to horizon. The cities below saw nothing but a strange and beautiful glow. Not a single person was harmed. Draxon stared at the sensor readings in disbelief. "They reflected our weapons," he said, almost to himself. "They reflected our weapons." While the Valkyrie were focused on the failed bombardment, Lisa Grant launched her counterattack. Human warships hit the 30 exposed cruisers from both sides. At close range, the kinetic guns did their work. Within 15 minutes, 22 of the 30 cruisers were destroyed or drifting without power. Draxon's flagship took a direct hit to its engine section that nearly cut the ship in half. He was forced to evacuate to a secondary vessel while his flagship burned behind him. Then came the moment that the entire galaxy would remember. A squadron of Valkyrie troop transports, seeing an opening in the orbital defenses, dove toward the surface and managed to land in the American Midwest. They came down in open farmland, and within minutes, thousands of Valkyrie soldiers poured out of the transports, armed and ready to fight. They expected to face a military force. What they found was something else entirely. Within an hour of the landing, the Valkyrie ground troops were engaged by American military units that arrived from nearby bases. But they were not alone. Alongside the soldiers came ordinary people, farmers, mechanics, teachers, shopkeepers, men and women who had been part of local defense militias for years. They came with rifles, with hunting weapons, with whatever they had. The Valkyrie soldiers were bigger, stronger, and had better equipment, but the humans fought with a fury that the aliens had never seen before. Every farmhouse became a defended position. Every tree line became an ambush point. Every road became a kill zone. The humans knew the ground. They knew every ditch, every hill, every building, and they fought as if every inch of soil was worth dying for, because to them, it was. The Valkyrie ground commander, trapped in a firefight that he was slowly losing, sent a report back to the fleet. His words were broadcast on an open channel, and the Galactic Council picked them up. "They are all soldiers," he said, his voice shaking with something between anger and fear. "Every single one of them. There are no civilians here." At the Galactic Council, the delegates watched the ground combat footage in complete silence. They saw humans, small and fragile compared to the Valkyrie, charging at alien soldiers with nothing but determination and whatever weapons they could carry. They saw wounded humans dragging themselves forward to keep fighting. They saw an old man with a hunting rifle take down a Valkyrie officer twice his size from behind a stone wall. A delegate from a peaceful federation of bird-like beings, her feathers ruffled in distress, asked the question that everyone was thinking. What kind of species trains its entire population for war? The Aeoni witness answered from its alcove, its voice soft and clear. The kind that has been at war with itself for its entire existence. They have simply found a new opponent, and they are very, very good at it. That evening, Draxon received a message from his homeworld. The Valkyrie Dominion's ruling council had watched the battle footage. They had seen the numbers, nearly 10,000 warships lost or crippled. The ground forces surrounded and being destroyed piece by piece, and humanity was still launching more ships, still sending more troops, still fighting with no sign of slowing down. The message was short. Withdraw immediately. This campaign is over. Draxon read the order twice. He looked out at the remains of his once mighty fleet, now fewer than 3,000 ships, many of them damaged and barely able to fly. He looked at the blue planet below, still fighting, still defiant, still utterly refusing to give up. He closed his eyes. Then he opened them and gave the order. All ships, retreat, maximum speed, get us out of here. The Valkyrie fleet turned and ran. They're attacking Earth. The Galactic Council could only stare in horror. Part 5. The Valkyrie fleet ran, and humanity chased them. Thousands of combat drones, still hungry for targets, followed the retreating ships all the way past the orbit of Mars. They nipped at the edges of the Valkyrie formation, like wolves chasing a wounded animal, picking off stragglers and damaged ships that fell behind. Every time a Valkyrie vessel slowed down or lost power, the drones were on it within seconds, tearing it apart with kinetic missiles before moving on to the next target. Admiral Draxon sat on the bridge of his borrowed command ship and watched the numbers fall. 8,000 became 7. 7 became 6. Ships that had survived the battle around Earth were now dying in the long, humiliating retreat through the outer system. His officers did not speak. There was nothing to say. By the time the fleet passed Neptune and prepared to jump to faster-than-light speed, fewer than 3,000 Valkyrie warships remained. Nearly 10,000 ships had been lost. Tens of thousands of Valkyrie soldiers and crew were dead, and they had not taken a single inch of human territory. Draxon gave the order to jump, and the fleet disappeared from the Sol system in a flash of light. The drones circled the empty space where the enemy had been, found nothing left to fight, and turned around to fly home. The Battle of Sol was over. Humanity had won. But the celebration was not what anyone expected. On Earth, the skies were still glowing from the scattered energy of the failed Valkyrie bombardment. In orbit, the wreckage of hundreds of ships, both human and alien, drifted in a slowly expanding cloud of metal and glass. On the surface, the farmland of the American Midwest was scarred with craters and burn marks where the Valkyrie troops had landed and been driven back. Buildings were destroyed, fields were torn up, roads were broken. The cost had been real. Over 200 human warships lost, thousands of crew members killed. The Mars defense platforms, which Danny Hobbs had spent years designing and building, were reduced to 2, and both were heavily damaged. On the ground, the militias and military units that had fought the Valkyrie landing force had taken casualties that would be felt in their communities for years. Humanity had won, but it had paid a price for that victory. President Laura Finch stood in the broadcast room of the White House bunker. She looked tired. Her eyes were red, and her voice was slightly hoarse. She had not slept in 2 days. Around her, aides and military officers moved quietly, still processing what had happened. The entire world was watching, and for the first time in human history, the entire galaxy was watching too. The broadcast was transmitted on all human channels, and for the first time, on the open galactic communication frequencies that every species in the Council could receive. Finch looked into the camera and spoke. People of Earth, citizens of the galaxy. 2 days ago, a foreign military force entered our solar system with the intention of conquering our world. They came with 12,000 warships. They came with the belief that we were weak, that we were unprepared, and that we would surrender. She paused for a moment. They were wrong. We defended our home. We fought in space and on the ground. We lost good people, brave people, people whose names we will carry with us for the rest of our history. Their sacrifice made this victory possible, and we will never forget them. I want to be clear about one thing. We did not want this fight. We do not want another one. Humanity has spent its entire existence struggling to survive, first against our own planet, then against each other, and now against a threat from beyond our world. We are tired of fighting, but we will never stop if we must. To the Galactic Council and to every species listening, I say this: humanity is ready to join the galactic community. We are ready to trade, to learn, to share what we know, and discover what you know. We offer our hand in friendship to anyone willing to take it. But let me also say this with complete clarity. Any future aggression against Earth, or any human territory, will be met with the same resolve you have just witnessed. We did not build our defenses because we wanted war. We built them because we knew, someday, war would come to us. And we were right. We ask for peace, but we are prepared for anything else. The broadcast ended. Across the galaxy, 400 species received the message. In the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council, the delegates listened in silence. When it was over, nobody spoke for a long time. Chancellor Mavon was the first to move. She rose from her stone seat and walked to the center of the chamber floor. She carried a single document in her upper right hand. It was a formal recognition of sovereignty, a document that declared a species to be an equal member of the galactic community, with all the rights and protections that came with it. Mavon had not personally drafted one of these documents in over 200 years. She had written this one herself. She placed it on the central podium and signed it. Let the record show that the species known as humanity is hereby recognized as a sovereign member of the Galactic Council. Their territory encompasses the Sol system and all assets within it. This recognition is given not as a gift, but as an acknowledgement of what they have earned. The document was transmitted to Earth within the hour. In the days that followed, everything changed. Delegations from dozens of species began requesting diplomatic contact with Earth. Some came out of genuine respect. They had watched the battle and seen a species that fought with courage and discipline, and they wanted to build a relationship with that kind of strength. Others came out of fear. They had seen what humanity could do when provoked, and they wanted to make very sure they were on friendly terms. A few came out of curiosity. The Aeoni witness traveled to Earth personally, the first time a member of the Aeoni collective had visited the planet in over 2 centuries. The witness requested a meeting with one specific human, and that request was granted. Danny Hobbs sat in a quiet room in a government building in Washington. His cane was leaning against his chair, and he was drinking tea because the doctors had told him to cut back on coffee. Across from him, the witness floated gently, its soft white light filling the room with a warm glow. "We have watched your species for a long time," the witness said. "We have seen your wars, your cruelty, your capacity for destruction. And we have seen your kindness, your creativity, your refusal to give up, even when everything seems lost." Danny listened and said nothing. "I came here to ask you one question," the witness continued. "The one question that every species in the galaxy wants answered. How did you know to prepare? How did you know that something would come?" Danny sat quietly for a while. He set his tea down and thought about it. He thought about the years he had spent building Longwatch. He thought about the late nights, the secret meetings, the arguments with politicians who thought he was crazy. He thought about the young engineers and soldiers who had given up normal lives to build weapons they hoped would never be used. He thought about the day, just a few days ago, when all of it had finally been needed. "We did not know," Danny said finally. "That is the whole point. We have never had the luxury of knowing what is coming. No one ever told us the universe was safe. No one ever promised us that we would be left alone. So we did the only thing we could do. We got ready for everything." The witness was quiet for a long moment. Then it said, "That may be the most human thing I have ever heard." Danny smiled slightly. "I suppose it is." On the other side of the world, Colonel Sam Brady, now promoted to general, sat in his new office at the headquarters of the United Earth Defense Command. It was a bigger room than he was used to, with windows and actual sunlight, which felt strange after years underground. Katie Marsh had been promoted too. She was now in charge of expanding the sensor network beyond the Sol system, building new listening posts that would give humanity early warning of any threat long before it reached their doorstep. Commander Lisa Grant had been given the most important job of all. Using technology salvaged from the wrecked Velkari ships and combined with human engineering, she was overseeing the construction of humanity's first, faster-than-light capable warship. It was being built in orbit, and it was already taking shape. It was ugly, heavy, and covered in armor, just like every other human warship. Lisa would not have it any other way. The final scene took place at the Galactic Council. A small reptilian species called the Drenari had been planning an expansion campaign into a populated system on the far side of the galaxy. They had been building their fleet for years, and were nearly ready to launch. But after watching the Battle of Sol, their ambassador walked into the Grand Chamber and formally withdrew all invasion plans. When asked why, the ambassador looked at the star map on the wall. He found the small yellow dot that marked humanity's sun, and he pointed at it. "We have seen what happens," he said simply. A murmur of agreement passed through the chamber. Chancellor Mivon nodded slowly from her seat. She instructed her archivists to update the Galactic Threat Registry. The previous entry for humanity had been filed under pre-contact, low priority. Mivon ordered it deleted. The new classification was entered into the record. It was short and simple, and it would remain there for as long as the Galactic Council existed. It read, "Do not provoke." "They're attacking Earth?" The Galactic Council could only stare in horror. Part 1. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council was the largest room ever built by any known species in the galaxy. It stretched upward like the inside of a mountain, with rows and rows of seats carved into the walls in a great circle. Over 400 alien species had representatives sitting in those seats. Some were tall and thin, some were short and wide, some floated in tanks of liquid, some were barely visible, just shapes made of light. They came from every corner of the galaxy, and they had gathered here for thousands of years to keep the peace between their worlds. Today, that peace was about to be broken. Ambassador Zorath of the Velkari Dominion walked to the center of the chamber floor. He was tall, nearly 8 feet, with dark green scales covering his body, and a jaw full of teeth that he liked to show when he smiled. His uniform was black and covered in medals. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who had never lost a fight in his life. He looked around at the gathered delegates, took a slow breath, and spoke. The Velkari Dominion hereby declares its intent to claim the Sol system and bring the species known as humans under our authority. A fleet of 12,000 warships is being prepared. We expect full compliance from the Council. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The chamber was perfectly still. Then, slowly, the reactions began. Some of the younger species looked confused. They whispered to each other. What was the Sol system? Who were humans? A few of them pulled up information on their screens and read about a small blue planet orbiting an ordinary yellow star on the far edge of the galaxy. The species living there had no faster-than-light travel. They had barely left their own moon. They seemed like nothing special. But the older species did not look confused. They looked afraid. High Chancellor Mivon sat at the top of the chamber in a seat made of dark stone. She was the leader of the council, and she had held that position for over 300 years. She was an insectoid, thin and angular, with 4 arms and 2 large compound eyes that saw everything in the room at once. She was old, even by the standards of her long-lived species, and very little surprised her anymore. But right now, she was gripping the arms of her chair so tightly that her claws had left marks in the stone. Ambassador Zorath, she said, her voice calm and clear, even though her body was tense. I must strongly advise you to reconsider this action. Zorath looked up at her and smiled, showing all of his teeth. With respect, Chancellor, the Velkari Dominion does not require the Council's permission to expand. We are merely informing you as a courtesy. This is not about permission, Mivon said. This is about survival, yours. A ripple of murmuring passed through the chamber. Zorath laughed. It was a deep, rough sound. Survival? Against a species that has never left its own star system? They have no fleet. They have no allies. They are primitives playing with rockets and satellites. My fleet will have them on their knees within a day. Mivon said nothing for a long moment. Then she spoke again, slowly and carefully. No species that has ever provoked humanity has remained intact long enough to file a second report with this council. I say this not as a threat, but as a historical fact. Zorath waved his hand in dismissal. Old stories and rumors. I deal in facts, Chancellor, and the facts are simple. 12,000 warships against a species that has never fought a battle in space. There is nothing to discuss. He turned and walked back to his seat. The chamber erupted in noise. Delegates argued, shouted, and waved their limbs in the air. But Zorath had made up his mind, and the council had no legal authority to stop a sovereign dominion from acting on its own. In a quiet alcove on the far side of the chamber, a figure made entirely of soft white light stood perfectly still. This was the witness, the representative of the Aeoni Collective. The Aeoni were one of the oldest known species in the galaxy. They were beings of pure energy, and they rarely spoke. When they did, everyone listened. The witness moved forward, gliding across the chamber floor without making a sound. Every eye turned toward it. "We observed humanity once," the witness said. Its voice was like a whisper that somehow filled the entire room. 200 of their years ago, two factions of their species were at war. They burned entire cities to the ground. They poisoned their own air and water. They killed millions of their own kind. The chamber was silent. And then, the witness continued, they stopped. They buried their dead. They cleared the rubble. And within a single generation, they had rebuilt everything, stronger than before. The witness turned toward Zorath. "We decided that day to never make contact with humanity, and to never under any circumstances give them a reason to look upward with hostile intent. I suggest you consider why." Zorath stared at the glowing figure for a moment, then shook his head and sat down. He did not respond. 12,000 light-years away, on the planet Earth, life was going on as it always did. Colonel Sam Brady sat in a small windowless room buried deep under the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. The room was full of screens and computers, and it smelled like old coffee and recycled air. Sam was 46 years old, built like a man who had spent his whole life in the military, with short gray hair and a face that looked like it had been carved out of rock. He was reading a routine report and drinking his third cup of coffee that morning. His technician, a 28-year-old woman named Katie Marsh, sat at a bank of screens on the other side of the room. Katie was sharp, quick, and had a habit of noticing things that other people missed. It was that habit that had gotten her assigned to this post, a monitoring station so secret that it did not officially exist. "Colonel," Katie said, her voice calm but tight, "I have something on the long-range array." Sam looked up. "What kind of something?" "Contacts. A lot of contacts, near the Kuiper Belt." She tapped her screen and pulled up the data. Thousands of small dots, arranged in a formation that was unmistakably military, were moving toward the inner solar system. Sam stood up and walked over to her station. He looked at the screen for a long time. His face did not change expression. He set his coffee mug down on the desk, very carefully, and then walked to a small red phone mounted on the wall. He picked it up. "This is Colonel Brady, authorization code 77 Delta. Wake up the whole chain. We have guests." He hung up the phone and turned back to Katie. "How long until they reach the inner system?" Katie ran the numbers. "At their current speed, about 72 hours. Sam nodded. "That is enough time." Within 90 minutes, the signal had reached every major military installation on Earth. Project Longwatch, a name that most people in the military had heard whispered about, but never confirmed, was now active. Deep beneath the ocean floors, inside hollowed-out mountains, and within orbital stations that had been disguised as floating debris for decades, machines that had never been turned on began to hum and come alive. The whole planet was waking up. Back at the Galactic Council, Chancellor Mavan gave a quiet order to her aide. "Point every observation array we have at the Sol system. Maximum resolution. Record everything." Her aide looked at her nervously. "Chancellor, do you really think this will be that significant?" Mavan looked at the star map on the wall, where a small yellow dot marked the position of Earth's sun. "Record everything," she repeated. "The galaxy will need to remember what happens next."